Yo, what's up, everybody? Crazy times we're living in. Good to be on a stream again. Let's get everybody rolling in here. Make sure my audio is good. Make sure everything's working. Man, let me know if you guys have been surviving this dip, because this has been one of the crazier things in crypto. But to be honest, if we're talking about other cycles, we have a lot to compare this to. We're going to talk a lot about different charts. We're going to talk about all the tariffs, China, everything that has been going on over the last little while, because I figured that the live stream would be the best way for me to be able to talk to you guys, answer questions, make sure that you guys knew exactly what I'm thinking. Is the 4-year cycle over? These are all going to be interesting talking points today. So let me get a head count, make sure everybody's rolling in here. Yo, what up, Clifford? Good to have you on board. XRP gal, how you doing? Miyoshi. Wake me up when XRP is back over $3. Well, to be honest, it's looking like, XRP held up great throughout this entire dip. So realistically, anybody with XRP is honestly doing better than the average market. It pumped really good to begin this cycle, and then it's held up really well. When we're talking about ETFs, we're talking about adoption. XRP is more primed than almost all of them. So audio, video, good. XRP. Man, you guys are out in here by the droves. We'll get XRP. We'll talk about it. Let's go through everything real quick. You know what? Since you guys want it so bad, we'll go. Let me take a look at Bitcoin first. I'll start off with Bitcoin. Let me share my screen, and then I'll talk about XRP after. I've got a few charts that I want to take a look at. So let's get in here. So right off the bat, guys, the thing that I've been telling everybody about is the 4-year cycle dead. Bob Lucas obviously sold 1/3 of his portfolio in that dip. And so there was a lot of fear around that. Anybody that's been following the 4-year cycle knows that he's the forefather of it. It's where I learned it from. It was me paying for a course in Bitcoin Live back in the 2018 bear market that I finally learned what the 4-year cycle was. And I learned it at the perfect time. And it's all because of Bob Lucas. So it was back in this period over in here. I'd paid for his course and he started covering it. And so from that point on, I pretty much knew that Bitcoin was at least following these 4-year cycles. Now the big question is, well, have we failed this 4-year cycle? And guys, I like to bring back the beginning of this cycle as a clear example of kind of the emotions that everybody's going to go through, because you're going to swing it. It's going to swing in both directions, right? So right off the bat, remember how early into this cycle, we started running into a new all-time high, and technically it made a new all-time high. And we were only like 800 some odd days into the cycle. We knew that historically that was way faster than anything that we had ever seen. So the big talk of the town was, this is a left translated cycle where we're going to be peaking on the left side of the mid-range. Now, for you guys that don't understand exactly what I'm talking about with 4-year cycles, we're going to draw some lines, and I'm going to make sure that everybody knows, so that everybody's in the awareness, so that we know, is this a failed cycle, or where are we, what are we working with right now? So right off the bat, when we're looking at Bitcoin, Bitcoin began and ended a 4-year cycle when we finished our bear market bottom. And the reason we know this is because if you look at the last bear market bottom, it was exactly 4 years from that one, right? So that was the ending of that last cycle. So we can remove this point and we can solely focus on what is taking place today. Now, we began a new 4-year cycle because we bottomed at the exact 4-year point from the last one. So we know that we're still following this trend. Now, the question then comes, you never analyze a 4-year cycle from the peaks. You don't look at it from where the top is. You analyze it from the peak low of the cycle to the peak low of the cycle. And the distance in between is 3 years. So we get a 3-year bull market, 1-year bear market. And up to this point, it's been very consistent, where we have exactly 3 years into the bull, and then we have 1 year into the bear. And this has been the case for every single one of the cycles over the last decade. Now, when we're looking at this cycle, remember how we started running so much quicker into the cycle. And remember, we're looking at 4 years, so 1,450 days. And technically, all of the other ones were 1,428 days, so a month off from being exactly 4 years. But you guys get the point. It's still the same thing. Technically, 1,450 days is going to be over here in October of 2026, basically the end of 2026. So when we're looking at this cycle, to begin this cycle, we ran to the all-time high. It was actually much quicker. It was sub 500 days that Bitcoin made a new all-time high. So everybody was on the talking point of, well, this is going to peak early, right? Because this is peaking early already. And we might end up having kind of that shortened cycle where we have the quicker blow off top, and then we end up going into the bear market, rather than actually having kind of that big parabolic cycle that most expect. And that was where Bob Lucas was, basically. We were all talking about this point, but then we pretty much shifted focus towards other things when Bitcoin consolidated below those all-time highs and went sideways. and brought that total all the way over here closer to like that 700-day mark, right? Because remember, where we're looking at this cycle from that all-time high of the last bull market, you know, to the point of us breaking out, 1100 days was pretty consistent with the last cycle. But going all the way over here to like 850 days from that prior all-time high, this was much, much quicker. So everybody was talking, you know, what if we end up peaking on the left side of the mid-range, right? Because when you're looking at the full cycle, you have this point and you have this point, and then the distance in between is going to give you that mid-range. So if we're looking at where that mid-range is, we look 750 days over, technically this is the mid-range, right? So, and it would technically be 725 days. So like somewhere right around there. That would be our mid-range. So the fact that Bitcoin is actually on the right side of the mid-range proves that this is a right translated cycle, right? Because that's how we know. If Bitcoin were to peak over in here, which at the time when we were watching Bitcoin run, it was looking like this thing was just going to teleport straight to 200K and we were going to get a peak on the left side of the mid-range, right? This is the mid-range. This is the left. This is the right. So Bitcoin being on the right side, its price action being in the right, means that we're in a right translated cycle. So I think that we can squash any beliefs around anything else about this cycle. So far, we're following a normal 4-year cycle. Now, with this big dip, everybody started to question, you know, oh my gosh, the bull market is over. The 4-year cycle is broken. We're going to start this brand new bear market. And that's why I like to share with you guys kind of the time frames of the cycle that I think it's most resemblance, has the most resemblance to, and that's 2017. I've been telling you guys throughout the beginning of this cycle for the last 3 years that I firmly believe that this cycle was going to be a 2017 type of bull run. And I still believe that. And I've maintained that belief throughout this entire period. Now, throughout this, it's been getting a little hairy, you know, because we have a lot more of an economical focus in crypto that we just didn't really have as much. In the last cycle, it was because of all of the QE and the money printing that Bitcoin even ran. This cycle, it's looking like it could be very much the same type of thing, where we have all of the tariff, we have all of this stuff. Trump is ultimately trying to get the interest rates lower. China's fighting back. So we don't really know exactly what's going to happen. We know, at least in the short term, Trump has, you know, pulled back those tariffs throughout all of the countries except for China, you know, for the next 90 days. So as this is happening, Bitcoin is at least bouncing, but we need to make it above this short-term trend line if we're going to see anything, you know, significant. So because we have all of this turmoil, because we have all of this fear, everybody's freaking out. You know, I like to remind you guys of that 2017 cycle because it's very much the same. You know, remember, we had just gone through Mt. Gox, right? So Bitcoin, where 80% of the volume was traded, just got hacked. Almost all of those Bitcoin were stolen, right? And so when we're looking at Bitcoin, it made a much longer bear market. And the time it took to get to the point of an all-time high, you know, or a new all-time high was pretty much 1,253 days. And technically we had made an attempt here and we did make a new all-time high here, but we had China ban Bitcoin at this moment. And I remember that was such a huge event. China banned Bitcoin because we always believed that, you know, China was kind of the forefront of Bitcoin. China was the leader of this because they have the technology. So when China came out and banned Bitcoin right here, I remember it was a huge deal because we were all waiting for it to break out. It just made this new all-time high. I went to bed that night, woke up the next morning expecting to see Bitcoin just making this big move. And then, you know, China bans it and everything drops. And it was this big kind of final shakeout that took place. We came back down to retest this trend line one more time. And then that was what led us into that major breakout. And this was the first alt season of that cycle, because technically some alts ran in this period, but it was this move where everything ran. XRP made that gigantic move going from like fractions of a penny, cleared to like $3. You know, Stellar Lumens, there was so many other ones, XMR. Ethereum started running early, but it was in this period that Ethereum went from $6 to 450. So it was a huge move in the market, and it was 1,253 days from that all-time high that we started to see the real significant portion of that cycle take off. So when I come over here and look at Bitcoin, you know, it looks a lot the same price action, where we've kind of just been growing off of this trend line. And if we're looking at the all-time high of the last cycle versus where we're at right now, we're at 1,246 days. So if we're looking at 2017, remember how glorious that cycle was just in that final year. The thing I like to remind everybody about is it was basically mid-March that cycle bottomed and started running. But it was really around mid-April that we had retested and reclaimed that prior all-time high level, and then the significant portion of the cycle started. So when we're looking at this, Bitcoin is even more bullish because if we have this all-time high, not only have we made a new all-time high, but we've retested that prior all-time high as new support. And we haven't failed the trend line. We came all the way back down and basically retested this trend line or got close to. And now we're looking at Bitcoin potentially breaking out of this short-term downtrend right here around mid-April, at the same point that, Bitcoin pretty much started reversing in 2017. So when we're talking about having all of the TradeFi people, when we're talking about Bitcoin becoming accepted as a technology, Trump has really streamlined a lot of adoption, regardless of the tariffs, regardless of all of the turmoil in the market. This was obviously something that was planned. This was something that, Trump has talked about for a long time. And we're just kind of seeing the cause and the effect of all of this. Now that he's pulling these tariffs, I do believe that there's a good chance that we're going to see this bottom. And as long as we can break out of this short-term downtrend that we've been in, I do believe we have a very real potential of that playing out over the next month or two. And if that's the case, don't be surprised if we see another one of these 2017 cycles, because so far the timeframes aren't any different. And that is the most important thing that we have to remember. Not only are the timeframes not any different, but the price action up to this point, we have already made this new all-time high. Bitcoin has had a lot of adoption. I do believe that we're at that point where we're going to see a lot more of that moving forward. So I wanted to go through and just kind of talk about the 4-year cycle, go through everything so that you guys know exactly, what I'm thinking with it. But I don't believe it's broken. I don't believe that you should be too worried about what we're seeing. But yeah, Bob Lucas did sell 1/3 of his portfolio. So when we're talking about that, that's a big thing. I was paying attention to that when he posted that. If you watched his 4-year cycle update, he talked a lot about how, Bitcoin is more kind of tied to the TradeFi system. And so because of that, if we were to see a recession inside of the stock market, it ultimately would be negative towards Bitcoin, or at least up to this point, we would believe it would be, because if we're talking about Bitcoin, it's always gone up or down with the S&P 500. It's more of a risk on investment. However, if, we just saw today that China and Russia are going to be starting to, trade their energy inside of Bitcoin. So we're starting to see other countries adopting it in more ways than one. And we kind of, believe from the beginning that this is the point where Bitcoin was going to have all of these things happen. So having all of the TradeFi people, having all of the institutions, having all of this adoption, I do believe that we're going to end up seeing, things reverse as long as we can break out from where we're at right now. The tariffs have been really pretty much gnarly up to this point. So you can't really predict too much about how all of it's going to play out for the most part, because there's a lot of variables at play. But that's the thing that everybody needs to be aware of, at least, is the 4-year cycle isn't broken. And as long as we're going to continue to follow this, I think that we need to just pay attention to the bigger picture. We still have the rest of this year to go in this cycle. Historically, for where 4-year cycles have stacked up for their tops, obviously we don't necessarily look at the tops for the time frames of the 4-year cycle, but at the same point, all of them have followed the same specific trend. So we have to be at least aware of that. Because Bitcoin is in the right translated portion of this cycle, it does pinpoint that we will have a cycle top at the end of this year. We didn't have that early cycle top that would have happened when Bitcoin first made that new all-time high. So we just kind of need to be paying attention for a lot of those same things. Let's see. Let's look at some. Oh, yeah. I have so many XRP people in here. Let's go take a peek, because I said I would. XRP. If you guys have any charts that you want me to cover as well, drop them. And I'll look at getting into them. But I have a few more charts I wanted to share. So when we're looking at XRP, it's held up really, really well in the short term. It had this nice run up to begin this cycle. It was looking a little bit sketchy with this head and shoulders forming right here. However, we kind of did a fake out right at the bottom of this, which is something I was watching for. And I told you guys in my last live stream when we were up here, I said that if we start to sell off, there's a good potential that we could come back down and actually fake, do kind of like this bear trap at the bottom of this support, because I have seen a lot of head and shoulders play out like that. And I'm really surprised that XRP didn't break down from this head and shoulders when we're talking about the whole freaking market kind of peeling down in the last couple weeks, So how well XRP has actually held up, it's a really good sign up to this point, because I do think it does at least pinpoint towards us at the potential having a correction done with this ABC. However, even if we did drag a little lower, the lowest I really saw XRP going to was kind of back down into this support over in here at around $1.30. And at the very low end, I guess it was possible to go back down to $1. But I led more to the belief that we would go towards $1.30 if we were to lose this support. We weren't, up to this point, we've kind of held support. The stock market's holding support. So as long as this is playing out, I think that XRP will continue to do the same. However, it really is just totally reliant upon, what we're going to see happen in the next few weeks regarding the Fed. Are they going to cut interest rates? Are they going to end up doing some more QE? Because if that's the case, I had a chart, and I don't know where I could find it anymore, but I used to have this chart, and it basically was the chart of QE, right? So every time they did quantitative easing and it showed the amount that they were basically printing, it showed a chart, and then I lined up the chart of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is really just following the liquidity cycles of the greater market. And that's the most important thing to be paying attention to. Like if we're looking at, let's go pull up Bitcoin, and then let's go to a weekly. Let's see if I can find it in here. Okay, if this works. No, it didn't work. I don't know how to overlay it. Okay, hold on a second. Let me pull up. Okay. Christian Hyperinflation. There we go. Okay. So before I jump into this, because this person showed me this, I'm going to give him a shout out. But I'm going to give him a shout out in a YouTube video when I'm going to make a video covering this specific thing. But right here, Crypto's Batman. Shout out to this guy for giving me this indicator and telling me how to use it. I'm going to make a video covering this indicator and I'll shout him out again. But I wanted to make sure that I at least did that. But when we're talking about Bitcoin here, and the M2 global money supply, we can see that the M2 is, basically steadily kept breaking out throughout this entire thing. And even throughout this dip, notice how Bitcoin's correcting here. The M2 was dipping, but it bottomed and it's already all the way back up near those prior all-time highs. So what you notice with Bitcoin is Bitcoin lags the global liquidity. So whatever the liquidity is doing, Bitcoin's going to follow, which is really why, we see this was the top of Bitcoin cycle in the last bull market. And this is where they stopped quantitative easing, right? We went through all of this inflation throughout this period. That's what gave us our big bull market. And then the second that they shut off the printer was the second that Bitcoin topped, and where we see the global M2 also top. We see this correction. Then at the very bottom, when the rest of the money starts to bottom, we started to see them, get holding on the market. They started injecting more liquidity, just little bits at a time. And then we started to see this global M2 pick back up again, going all the way back up to those prior all-time highs, Bitcoin following along with it throughout this entire period. However, Bitcoin ran, and obviously does run, kind of in its own way. Notice how Bitcoin made a much bigger move here versus the M2 just kind of coming back up to those prior highs. Bitcoin is going to move in its own ways depending on the hype and all of the adoption that it sees. However, for the most part, it's going to continue to follow the same trend. And notice how Bitcoin's all the way down here at the bottom of this correction, working on a breakout, yet the M1 is all the way back up here, kind of in this bull flag, sitting back at the prior all-time highs. If this thing continues to go up, really, like I said, dependent on what the Federal Reserve does. Are they going to cut interest rates? If they cut interest rates, in my opinion, that's going to be ultimately bullish for crypto and the rest of the broader markets, because this just means that we're going to have even more liquidity coming into the market. And when we're looking at the M2, notice how it's kind of just had this big sort of ascending triangle type of formation going. And really what we've done is broken out of that ascending triangle right here, retested that. And when you look at Bitcoin, its chart pretty much looks the same. Obviously, it didn't go quite as high when we're talking right here and right here, but Bitcoin is pretty much following the same pattern where we have this prior all-time high. We had this consolidation underneath. Same thing with the M2, but now the M2 broke out of all-time highs. At the same point, Bitcoin broke out of those all-time highs. The M2's back at all-time highs, getting ready for another one. and Bitcoin's kind of at the bottom of the correction. So you would imagine from this point on, as long as that money printer is going to keep injecting new liquidity into the market, Bitcoin's going to keep going up. The broader market's going to keep going up. We're going to see the completion of this 4-year cycle, and we're not at the point where it's just dead and we're crashed and everything's over, right? So that's my ideas about what is going on currently. I don't really think that we have too much to worry about. Well, we do have a lot to worry about. I'm not going to say that. That's kind of ignorant to say. We have a lot to worry about. However, is the cycle over? Is everything in the broader picture kind of showing what we need to see? In my eyes, yes. As long as that Fed keeps injecting liquidity, we should see the market keep going up. But you guys got to keep in mind that that's not necessarily a good thing either, right? With them injecting new liquidity, if we were to see a whole bunch new QE take place, we're going to ultimately see more inflation over the next few years as well. So it sucks because we've already seen such terrible inflation up to this point. And for that to even get worse over the next little while, everybody has to really do their part by, if we're gifted with a huge cycle where Bitcoin goes to 200, 250K, you got to sell everything, because if you don't sell, and you're stuck holding the bag on this type of a crypto cycle that's going to be double propped up, back-to-back cycles of QE. And realistically, like I stated, guys, Bitcoin is just a product of QE. When we're looking at Bitcoin, it's got a capped supply. We know that if they're going to keep injecting liquidity into the market, it's going to make the prices of things keep moving. And that's the reason everything goes up. However, inflation is always the negative aspect of this. And we're at the point where we're starting to see pretty gnarly inflation. People are kind of just barely able to keep their heads afloat. So if you could imagine a whole new round of QE going throughout this year, them cutting QE and that being the top of our cycle, probably at the end of the year, similar to what we saw in the last bull market, you would imagine that, the amount of inflation you would see over the following 5 years would just be truly like off the charts. So it's a little bit scary, because now you kind of have to be planning, well, not only do I have to nail the cycle top, I got to take my profits at the right time and hope I'm in the things that are going to move when that happens. But now you've got the trick about how the heck do you, maintain yourself throughout all of this inflation, and, what type of asset should you buy? Should you buy real estate, or is that even in and of itself kind of propped up and we're due for a correction? And in my eyes, we are due for a correction. But the issue is, if we keep printing money, assets like houses and stuff are going to keep going up as well. So you're kind of in this unfortunate situation where you kind of either have to just bite the bullet and buy something expensive and jump on board and hope to God it doesn't crash, or you just wait a few years, have the patience, and then look to kind of jump in on any sort of dip if we get the dip. In my eyes, 2030 has always been the focal point for me. I've always said that we're going to probably have our major cycle top at 2030, and this is like the Dow Jones cycle, the 100-year cycle. And I still believe that, because basically we have all of these people that say they're going to crash the market in 2030, these rich people, billionaires all across the world. So, whether they're full of crap or what, I don't know, but they have a lot of money and I wouldn't put it past them. So if they're saying they're going to crash the market in 2030, the Great Depression was, almost exactly 100 years ago at this point. It peaked in 2029 or 1929. Let's go take a peek, actually. And I'll share with you guys what I'm talking about here. Because when we're looking at the Dow Jones, let me remove this liquidity cycle here. I mean, it retested the prior highs. All of this was just kind of a big retest, which easily could just be this big ABC correction all the way back down to the prior highs, which we have seen, happen plenty of times. That's kind of what I'm leaning towards. But when we're talking about the everything cycle, oh man, it's so sketchy looking. I remember being in 2017 thinking, oh man, there's no way this can just keep going up, and it just keeps going up. But when we're looking at this, the Dow Jones peaked all the way back over here in 1929. And then it had this 2-year sell-off where it just completely catered in. And then we came all the way back down, and it was at the bottom of 2032, or not 1932, that we see the cycle bottom, right? So it was right here. Great Depression, boom. So if we're looking at this, we've just been on this nice, glorious uptrend throughout the entire time. Everything just going more and more parabolic throughout. However, when we're talking about the potential of us just repeating the same pattern, we're right at that point. You know, we basically have the next 4 years to go before we're at that 2029 cycle top. So does Bitcoin get another 4-year cycle? You know, maybe we have one more 4-year cycle and then the real top happens. I don't know, man. But to be honest, the 4-year cycle, even at this point, I've kind of maintained the belief that this might be the ending of it, was this cycle. So it seems like we could very well be at that point, just because we have the TradeFi people in, we have the institutions, we have all this stuff. It would make sense that Bitcoin would kind of find some sort of a different sort of cycle, right? Because in my eyes, the 4-year cycle is more like the parabolic trends, like the early adoption phases of the cycle. So this cycle, having all of the institutions getting on board, the only thing we haven't seen is true mainstream adoption, true mainstream euphoria. And as that takes place, it would make sense to me that, you know, the idea of the 4-year cycle continuing to follow through might be, you know, it probably won't. And I've kind of believed that if we take our profits at the end of this cycle, you don't have to try and question it. You can just kind of play the cycle however it seems to go, because we don't know what's going to happen. And I believe that as long as this cycle runs and we have kind of a completion of this 4-year cycle, we have at least one chance to cash out, make a lot of profit, and then we don't really have to question and continue to play the game from that point. We can wait an 80% correction, and then we can slowly buy back in. We don't really have to, you know, worry too much about it. But I think that's the best thing, because I think it's a great idea to continue to accumulate Bitcoin long term. The rest of the altcoins, I can't say the same for, because altcoins have always kind of been a game of musical chairs. They've always been the risk asset and the play in the cycles. However, if we're talking about getting a true euphoric cycle of retail, it makes sense that they're going to also continue to have a big run. It's just that we've seen Ethereum get smashed right now. Because Ethereum got smashed, so many other things are smashed. However, it's a lot of the same things that have happened even in 2017. You know, altcoins were kind of at their ground floors as well. And then we ended up seeing all of that new money kind of enter the market. So I do think that we're going to end up seeing more money coming into the market, as long as we're going to see the money printer turn on. And at this point, it sucks, because that is really the only thing keeping the markets afloat. But, you know, what other choice do you have, really? I mean, we can outperform the rate of inflation by a landslide by being in crypto. It's going to drive everybody to get into these risk type of plays. It's going to drive the S&P 500 up. It's going to drive everything up. The more that those go up, the more that people are encouraged to build and grow. And, you know, if we have low interest rates, once again, that's really Trump's focus. Get the low interest rates. As long as we have the low interest rates, it's going to really encourage people to continue to build, continue to take out loans, grow businesses, do all of these things. And if that's happening, the stock market's going up, companies are profiting. But the question is, are we in this tipping point of a recession, like Bob Lucas says, like some of these other people say? Is the money printer going to be enough to make it go higher? And, you know, are we just at the point of massive hyperinflation? Because it seems like that's the case. But the thing is, guys, Bob Lucas only sold 1/3 as risk management. It's not like the guy's bearish on the 4-year cycle. He knows that we're still following the 4-year cycle. He knows that we're still in this period. I mean, the dude is the master of it. If anybody knows, it's him. However, he at least understands that bigger picture, there is a broader thing at play, a broader narrative between the true talks of a recession. And if that's going to be the case, then, you know, you have to at least, in someone that's up 18x, you know, why wouldn't you pull at least some profit? So it makes sense. But do I think that he messed up? No. He's made more money than most people have up to this point just trading Bitcoin. So, you know, he proves himself that he's a master at knowing what he's doing in the cycles. And it really just shows that we can still continue to play these long-term cycles. It's just that, you know, the guy has a lot more money, and I'm pretty much all the way invested in crypto. So it's pretty much sink or swim in a lot of ways for me when I'm investing into these, when my business is built on it and all of these things. So when it comes to me, you know, I have maybe a bias in that regard. But at the end of the day, you know, if we were to see the 4-year cycle fail, then it would probably just revolve around us losing this high that we're at up in this period. Do I think that that's going to be the case? You know, I don't necessarily lean towards that. I still think we are going to follow the 4-year cycle. However, it's at least a potential to talk about, right? You know, what if we were to see Bitcoin reject up in here again? Maybe Bitcoin comes in, retest this resistance over the next couple of days. We retest that, and then it just rejects, and then we start falling lower, and we make a new low, and then there's more tariff news, and then there's more bad stuff around China. That is a potential that you have to at least be aware about, because of the fact Bitcoin is now tied to the broader markets. It is now directly correlated with all of those. One of the things that I think is important that a lot of people aren't necessarily considering a lot is MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy just gave out a memo to everybody basically stating that due to make our demands, our contractual demands, to be able to fulfill these interest payments and stuff like that, we may have to sell some of our Bitcoin at a loss if that's the case. And they were a small ways away. It was like 13% away, 67K or something like that, I think was their break even point. So if we were to see Bitcoin continue to drop and MicroStrategy have to actually sell Bitcoin, I think that that's going to be a real negative loop. It'll just be basically a snake eating its own tail. And that is a very real potential that could drag Bitcoin lower. And in my eyes, that kind of would be where we see the recession talk come to a fruition. Maybe the Fed doesn't cut interest rates. Maybe the Fed isn't going to print any money. Maybe all of this was just a flop by Trump. And if that is the case, we very easily could be at an early cycle top. And our entire bull market for Bitcoin ends up just being kind of like almost a similar cycle as the last one, except it's an even bigger troll, right? Because remember in the last cycle, Bitcoin pretended like it was going to make this big blow off top like it did in 2017. And all we did was make one higher high and then reject. So that type of a bull trap, what if our entire cycle is something like that, where, this is our all-time high. We make one teeny tiny all-time high, and then we just start a brand new bear market. It's definitely a potential. You can't say that it's not. And all of that would be correlated with recession and all of this stuff. And so it's an unfortunate thing. We don't want to see that happen, obviously. But if that does happen, you have to be at least aware that, well, then you're starting that bear market. Then you're going all the way back down. However, do I think that what I would lean towards is Bitcoin would probably bounce. It would probably make a lower high, and we would just kind of distribute over the rest of this year before we peaked and then ended up just going into another 1 year bear market. I still think that the price action is going to end up peaking at the end of the year. The question is the price action just going to consolidate sideways until the end of the year and then crash? Or is it going to continue to go up into a true blow off top like we would lean to believe? So those are all the questions. We really don't know. And that's kind of the beauty of the 4 year cycle is, hindsight's 2020. We can talk all we want about the 4 year cycle. We can talk all we want about this stuff, but does it really mean that we're going to follow it true? We don't know. And at this point, I can share with you guys the trends. I can share with you guys how up to this point we have followed it perfectly. And we do look like we are just at that same pace of 2017. However, there is always a downside potential. And that's the whole reason why Bob sold 1/3 of his portfolio. If you basically only risk what you're willing to lose, right? I'm really young, so I'm not as worried about losing what I have versus somebody who's, made 18x his portfolio and being into Bitcoin. He's already got a lot of money from businesses and finance stuff that he did prior. And the guy's like old grandpa, basically. So at that case, it makes sense to pull 1/3. If it does go lower, whatever, I've taken a lot of profits. I can use that to actually buy back in the dip that we're going to see. However, if we end up bottoming and this was all just a fluke, he can always just buy back in at a little higher price, and he's not really missing out on that much, right? So that's kind of the thing to be aware of is, make that decision for yourself because it's different from everybody. But we do have at least a potential of a downside target. I'm much more leaning towards the 4 year cycle playing out. We're going to still continue to see Bitcoin run throughout the cycle, but it's just at least a talking point to consider and to be aware of and know like kind of where your cutting point is. If we were to reject and fall back below the prior all-time highs and be unable to get back above, at that point, it'd be worth, kind of pulling what you can, harvest what you can out of the market, and then look to, target the bear market bottom whenever that's going to be, probably at the end of 2026, right? That would be probably the safest strategy to play if you're trying to be more into the markets during this period and don't want to sell. However, Bitcoin is in a new all-time high. It is pulling back down to that prior all-time highs, new support. Liquidity is up. There's potentials of rate cuts and, all of these things. So in my eyes, it's a little bit better just to wait and see. However, some people don't want to play that amount of risk. You don't want to play the wait and see and then be down another 30% or something. So that's at least something to be aware of, right? 90-day tariff delay, there is no bear market. Yeah, I mean, see, this is exactly kind of what everybody expected too. Trump would at any point just pull back on the tariffs and then everything would be fine. And that's, why we're seeing Bitcoin bottom right now. We haven't broken out though yet. We have to see what the heck is going to happen there. We do have some more indexes and whatnot in things. If we're looking, let's see. Let's go take a look at the 10-year. So basically, it's been rumored that China has been accumulating all of these, and that's what's been actually propping up the price. And so they're buying up all of these and they're dumping our debt to do it. And so as this is happening, it's kind of doing the opposite of what people thought Trump was trying to do, where he was trying to refinance the debt, make the bond market actually drop so that we could refinance the debt at a lower price, saving the American people more money, right? All of those things. However, China played the gamble, and then they started saying, well, screw you, we're going to buy them. And now that's what's really been pushing up the value of these. Now, the question is, because he pulled back the tariffs, can China just continue to do more of this? What is really China doing? Because, do we truly know? All we can say is that this has been going up ever since the trade war started. And then there's speculation that it's all China behind it. But we don't necessarily know 1000% what the heck China is doing. What I can say is China's stock market got slammed. If we come over here and look at the Hang Seng Index, China's stock market had its biggest drop since, I think, the 2008 financial crisis, I believe, if not COVID. Yeah, it was the 2008 financial crisis. It had its biggest, drop since that period over in there. So when we're talking about how all of this stuff is playing out, China doesn't really have the luxury, in my eyes, to play too much hardball just because of the fact America has more money and China has their biggest real estate bubble right now of all time. Like, they're kind of in an interesting point where you don't necessarily know what is going to happen. And really, nobody knows what's going to happen around the tariffs. But having Trump basically pull back all of the tariffs for all of the other countries, he made all of the deals that he wanted. He got all of the good things. So then he says, all right, we're going to pull them. He yanks out all of those, rug pulls everybody. Now the markets are rebounding over here, Europe, all of this stuff. However, China still has their tariffs, right? And China does all of this exporting. Obviously, they export to other countries than just America. However, it's just something to consider, right? If we were to see China start to actually have to turn on their money printers, and we're starting to see China and America QE at the same exact time, it really could be like that 2017 cycle where we have massive hyperinflation from both sides driving up the prices of assets, which is a good opportunity if you own the assets that they're driving up. But even then, with these tariffs, we're already starting to see China and Russia do business with Bitcoin. So, regardless of the QE, what if we see a lot of money coming into Bitcoin just in the angles that, we kind of always predicted that would happen? We just never knew how. What if that is what it is? All of these tariffs, all of this, the volatility drives these countries to do their own trading in Bitcoin. So they have to start accumulating Bitcoin. Who knows what, if that would really drive up the values, whether it's actually going to be QE that's going to give us a bull run. In the last cycle, it was QE that gave us a bull run, but it was QE that saved everything, right? Because all of the markets were completely going to crash if we didn't turn on the printer. So with all of that being said, are we kind of just a byproduct of massive hyperinflation and debt and money printing at this point? Because it seems kind of like that, which is unfortunate because it marks, in my eyes, the beginning of the end, right? If this is the only thing that we can do to make the markets go up is just print more money, and we're delaying the recession that we probably should have at this point, it just shows that the true top that's coming is going to be really gnarly, right? The more that we extend this, the more that we kind of kick the rock down the road, the worse that this debt bubble is going to get. And if we print a bunch more money in this cycle, there's a very real potential that we're not very far off from the everything peak of the cycle. And that's why I say that we got to do our part by taking profits at the end of this bull market, because it really will be gnarly on the way back down. All of the sell-off that we'll see, the hyperinflation, and if you don't take profits and you're just kind of trying to tread and keep your head above water throughout, oh man, it's just crazy to think how much things have got, how like the price and the cost of everything, how much more expensive it's gotten over the last few years, and to think of it actually getting worse in a lot of ways. I mean, in the short term, you would imagine it's going to get a lot worse just because of the tariffs and stuff. But now that those have been pulled back, all of that was a big, sham, whatever. Maybe in the short term, some things will go up like stuff from China, but for the most part, the big thing is just what happens with the Fed. That's where all eyes are on right now. I think that if they turn that printer on, it's a go ahead, huge bull run, all of these things. And if China's cooked and they're sitting over there actually sweating and they don't know what they're going to do, I don't really know. I'm not Chinese. I can't speak for them or know what they're talking about. However, if that's the case and China really is in kind of a bad situation, maybe we end up seeing them turn their printers on as well, and we see kind of a double whammy on both sides of the world just going, making the greatest blow off top in crypto history. I've always said that I thought this cycle was going to be like 2017. So the more that I'm looking at this cycle, the more that it looks like 2017, the more that it seems like we're pretty much just following a similar sort of narrative, except obviously it's a different narrative. It's just that I think that the upside potential is just going to be absolutely massive. Double whammy it up. Amen, brother. What is your Ethereum price target? I haven't even looked at Ethereum yet. That's a good thing to go take a peek at. Let's go look. So ETH, I've obviously been explaining that I believe that Ethereum is basically doing the Bitcoin 14K fractal, where we peaked at 14K and then we had this fake out big capitulation before the market basically did that. This is what I'm still anticipating. I know it seems crazy, but keep in mind, guys, that where we were at with Bitcoin in that last cycle, like, man, it's really amazing seeing this stuff playing out in real time, because I've always said Ethereum just follows Bitcoin, and they always follow the driver of the liquidity. Bitcoin is the driver of liquidity. Bitcoin makes these cycles, and Ethereum copies the cycle like verbatim. It's almost the same thing. And it's always blown my mind that Bitcoin does this. And, that's why I've always been like kind of fascinated with cycles, is because you can see the same patterns being repeated over and over and over. Like, for example, Bitcoin, this cycle over in here was the exact same as Ethereum's first cycle. The price action is identical. There's almost no difference here. Same, blow off top, lower high, double bottom. It just follows the same pattern. Obviously, it can be somewhat different, but you guys get the point of what I'm saying. Even going into this cycle, okay, well then Bitcoin starts the 2017 cycle, and we go through this type of consolidation, right? It's the same thing that Ethereum is doing right here. All Ethereum is doing is just following the exact same cycle as Bitcoin did, right? Peak, then you get this lower high, you get this fake out here, get the fake out here. Obviously, the Ethereum one was more volatile. We came all the way back up to the range highs, but it's the same thing, because remember, Ethereum was breaking out of this downtrending resistance. Anytime you have a market make a false breakout of a downtrending resistance, the downside reaction is usually really volatile. And I remember Haejin Lee, the guy who I learned a lot of Elliott wave theory from, he was saying that all the way back over in here. Because remember, Bitcoin had broken out. It had retested this 8K support level, right? Everybody, including me, obviously, but everybody thought that we were going to hold the support. And this is where I first started my channel. And I was saying that. I was like, we're bottomed, everything's good. And we started breaking out. And I was like, this is bullish, everything's going to go. And then we made this false breakout. It started to pull back. We lost that support. And then we made this huge capitulation right here. It's the exact same thing that Ethereum is doing right now. There is 1000% no difference. And I made this video like 3 weeks ago, I think was my last Ethereum update, talking about this exact thing. I said, this is what I believe is going to happen with Ethereum. It is following the same thing. What I didn't foresee was that we would have this massive drop, and that Trump would come in and mess up everything with tariffs, and that the Fed would have no choice but to start QE and money printing and do a whole new round of that before to make the markets actually bottom, right? That's the same thing that happened here. Remember, Bitcoin was all the way down here, and then the Fed said, all right, we're turning on the printer, boys. And then all of the Jay Powell memes of him firing up the money printers were going, right? And then we started to see Bitcoin rebound and bottom. And it was that basically sent us into that new cycle. So when I look at Ethereum and we see how Ethereum has always followed the same price action, now we have the exact same fundamental catalyst coming up, Potentially, we don't know what the Fed is going to truly do yet. However, if we're going to see them turn on that money printer, we're going to see a whole new round of things like like what we saw in the last cycle. I mean, we are going to follow the same thing. I mean, it's going to do the same type of stuff. Maybe we even have an early cycle top, not an early cycle top because we're not doing that right now, but maybe we peak like this. We don't kind of make this secondary peak like what we did at 69K. Maybe Ethereum ends up only having that first run into new all-time highs. That would make the most sense to me, right? Where we do something like this. 10, 15, 20K. I don't know how high it's going to go. I would imagine it could go to 20K though. So I would personally, if I was playing this, it would have to peak clear over here, right here. Ignore the 69K top. All we're looking at is this one right here. If we're going to see QE, I think ETH peaks here. I don't think we have this secondary pullback and we make another new all-time high. If we're going to see QE, we're already so late into 2025 that we're going to end up just seeing this thing run straight into the cycle top in my eyes. So we're going to follow that same thing that Bitcoin did, obviously, but I think we're going to do all of the peaking just right in this period over here. So that's why I say that ETH is probably going to hit 10 to 20K. That's what I've maintained. I still kind of lean towards that. And then we'll end up seeing that peak, and then we'll start that new bear market back down. But I do think that all we're doing right now is just following the exact same patterns. Remember how Bitcoin came all the way back down into its prior all-time high of that 2017 cycle? Bitcoin came all the way back down and retested even below the highs of 2017. Everybody was like, oh my God, the world is ending. We're screwed. Bitcoin's dead, right? And it was the FTX collapse, everything. Oh my gosh, everything is so screwed. Ethereum is going to come back down and do the same freaking thing. And it's probably going to come all the way back down and freaking retest these highs right here at like 4K. It's going to probably even do it in an uglier way. So that's what I'm leaning towards personally. ETH will peak at 10 to 20K, probably 15 to 20K to make it a little bit, better. We'll see this peak. ETH will come. Well, that's going to be a lot more quick. It's going to be like this. All the way back down to like here. And then, we may start a new cycle. We may not. I really don't know what's going to happen after this bull market. But this is what I think happens to Ethereum on the bigger picture. We're going to run to that 15 to 20K mark. ETH is going to get smoked. It's going to come all the way back down to like 4K. And then truthfully, whether that thing survives, who knows? ETH is garbage. We know that. It's never once been able to do anything it said it was going to do. At this point, it's getting all of its liquidity yanked from the layer 2s and all of these DeFi protocols and everything. And it's just kind of like stagnated the market for altcoins. However, ETH is the better play than Solana. I truly believe that right now because of all of the negativity around Ethereum, because of how much it's got smoked in this dip, because of all of those things. I personally believe that ETH is the better buy right now. We had all of this big Solana run because of Pump.Fund, because of all of the meme coins and all of that. That was what drove the Solana price higher throughout this cycle. I don't anticipate meme coins being quite as, powerful of a narrative going into the next portion because we have yet to see the true institutional type of plays take off. And those are where we're going to see a lot of money flocking in my eyes. The true DeFi, the real things that are going to be used in the future. It's just kind of been this fun narrative to play memes, and they're going to continue to run. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think that Solana is going to have quite the same uprise just because of the memes. It has to have other products building in it. Otherwise, it's just going to kind of stagnate. I do believe that we're going to see ETH actually start to outperform these things. So in the short term, even though ETH is the ugly play, it's the, the redheaded stepchild, if you will. No offense. That's kind of what I think is the better play right now. So I think that, ETH is going to do its thing. And the chart I'm drawing right now on the screen is what I think ETH is going to end up doing, assuming that QE starts, assuming they print more money and all of this stuff. ETH is the second Bitcoin. It will always be like a store of value no matter what it does. Yeah, I mean, there's too much money in Ethereum for it not to. I mean, the market has decided that Ethereum is the EVM virtual machine that everybody wants to use. There has been other cute little opportunities to make money like Solana, but nobody uses Solana aside from just gambling on meme coins. And anybody that would debate that just as being ignorant. So realistically, Ethereum, nobody uses Ethereum necessarily. Like some people right now are using it for some stuff, but for the most part, Ethereum is mainly consisted of just building upon, right? That's what people do. They build on Ethereum. There's some DeFi protocols and things like that. But for the most part, we haven't really been able to see that big amount of adoption, all of that new growth stepping into the market. I think that that's what's coming soon. And that's why I lean to more towards more of kind of the true adoption cycle. And I don't know how to word this. The real projects, the real utility, that's the word I'm looking for. The real utility takes off in the next portion of the cycle. However, if we're going to see, a bunch of retail flock into this market like never before, which makes sense if we have all of the TradeFi people here, we could be at a very easily topping point of everything where not only is Trump launching meme coins, celebrities are launching meme coins left and right. Real projects are blowing up left and right. We got the RWAs, the AIs, the thises, the that's, right? All of that stuff, the everything portion of the cycle, I think commences now. So do I think memes are dead? No. Do I think everything else is dead? No. I think that they're all going to continue to run. It's just that I think the ETH is going to outperform Solana, and I think that it was just the memes up to this point that drove that adoption for the most part. So yeah. No one uses Solana. No, they use Solana. It's just that like a legit project, like it's just memes. That's the point. Everybody uses Solana for memes. Now, Ethereum, there's a lot more real production, adoption, real projects on Ethereum, and they has to be because Ethereum sucks. So Solana runs and memes. Like, subscribe. Shout out. Appreciate you. Enjoy life. Solana is scalable. Solana is not scalable because they have to shut it down. Solana shuts down all the time. So you can't say that that's scalable. If you had 3, 4, 5 times as much network effect, it would have more of the same issues. So realistically, that's why I say, is there really any type of blockchain application that we can use, any layer that truly does the things that we need? Everybody says, oh, this one does, until it gets adoption and then has some issue. You can't say Solana is scalable because it still has some of the same issues that other EVM chains run into. And to be truly decentralized, in my eyes, is the most important aspect. So yes, Solana is faster, way faster than Ethereum and all of these things. Yes, it's affordable and all of this stuff. But until it's truly decentralized and until it actually, you don't have to, pause the chain and roll things back and do all of this silly stuff. There's periods of downtime for Solana. And that's the big thing. What chain is going to work efficiently? It's going to work quickly, and it's going to be truly decentralized, because in my eyes, that's the one that gets the run. We've only pivoted towards Ethereum because that's just the first example. They were just kind of the pioneers as far as just running out into the woods and just hoping that they could make their way. So in my eyes, Ethereum, it's hard to say if Ethereum is really going to be that thing. It sucks so bad. I have my doubts, but because there's so much money in Ethereum, it's hard to say that it's not that thing right now. Solana is not that thing, even though it's caught up significantly as far as that network effect with Ethereum. It's caught up with that dominance with Bitcoin, with Ethereum, and all of these things. It's just the idea that there are competitors like Sway. Sway's the one that I like. I really like Sway. Sway's the one that I'm most excited for, to be honest, because that's the one that I've invested into. Let me look at it. Sway's seeing a nice little bounce in here, but for the most part, we're seeing a lot of this bullish divergence playing out in a lot of these markets, which is telling us that at least the short term, the bottom is in. We'll see what continues to happen from here. But in my eyes, this is the very real potential of this double bottom playing out. And if that's the case and we get back above this $2.83 mark, in my eyes, this thing's going to reverse and it's going to continue to go up. So right now we have this great opportunity throughout the market to buy a lot of different, things. The one that I'm most excited about is Cetus. That's the one that I bought. That's the one I added more to in this dip. Let's see if I can even pull it up. all the way back down. You get a better buy all the way back down, still in support of wave 3 and 4. So with this one, I think it's going to just follow whatever sway does. It's just going to do it more volatile with more volatility. It's either going to do a higher ROI both to the upside and to the downside as far as, you know, percent loss if it goes down. But I look at this, I'm going to remove all these drawing tools because it doesn't really make sense. All we've done up to this point was made a wave 1 impulse here, wave 2 correction here, and this is also a wave 1 impulse here and a wave 2 correction there. So what we have coming next is wave 3 of 3, which is going to be the most parabolic one. So that's why, you know, the same thing is going to happen with sway as well, because these follow each other. This one is just following the other chart, just with more volatility. But when I'm looking at this, you know, this has the same bullish divergence in here. It's looking like we're done with this correction as far as the broader market, assuming that we can keep holding this. It's already finished this ABC correction. In my eyes, you'll make more money buying this, and it'll just continue to follow sway. You know, this is like a 5x just to go back up to the range highs versus sway. Let's see what difference that would even be, because I don't know. See, it's only 2.5x. So that, in my eyes, is why it's the better buy. I like, if I like a chain that I feel like is worth too much and I won't make as much money buying it, I'll just go buy some of the stuff built on it. My biggest bag is sway right now. Honestly, that's a perfect one to hold in my eyes. That's probably going to be the Solana of this entire cycle. Let's see here. I had some stuff I was going to show you, but I can't remember. Crypto punks have held up really well in this dip, even though Ethereum has gotten demolished. If you guys have any charts that you want me to cover, drop them now. Honestly, now would be a time to buy NFTs because of how freaking cheap Ethereum is. If we're going to see them print a bunch of money, Ethereum NFTs are going to end up running, and you know, these aren't even worth that much anymore. You can get a pudgy penguin for 15K when literally in December 15th, at the very ending of last year, beginning of this year, they were $98,000. So, and there was 378 sales. So the fact that you can buy something like that right now, in my eyes, is why there is opportunity in Ethereum. It's just because it got smoked so hard. For example, I'm looking over here at NFT price floor. I was just taking a peek at some of these. You can actually afford to own some of these NFTs. You know, maybe not at Bored Ape. They're a little bit more expensive at 23 grand car. So you could sell your car, I guess. But here's the thing. If these things are going to end up bottoming in here and we're going to see money printer turn on and they end up running, you know, there's a very real potential that these things are going to be where a lot of money is actually made. The fact that you can own them, like the pudgy penguins being worth 100 grand just recently, right over in here, 25 ETH when ETH was worth 4 grand. Now ETH's worth like $1,500 and they're worth, you know, just under 10 Ethereum. So in my eyes, I think pudgy penguins are an amazing buy opportunity right now because of how hard Ethereum got hit. But the same can be said across the board. You know, the mutant apes, they're only worth just under 4,000. These things look bottomed. That's a double bottom formation. This thing's rounding out, and that's against Ethereum. So it looks like they're ready to start outperforming ETH. If you're looking at the dollar, same thing. They're at least holding support. Even if they only ran up here into like 40, 50, 60K, the fact that you can buy one for 4 grand, you know, I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the NFT market right now. And I think it's worth taking a peek at. Solana NFTs, that'd be a good opportunity in my eyes. I don't think we've seen some Solana NFTs run. These are worth a little bit more. Let's see what they look like. Honestly, the Mad Lads look nice. Perfect one-wave impulse, little two-wave correction, kind of rounding out down here in wave 2. I honestly think Mad Lads are going to fly. The crypto pair doesn't look very good, but there's not a lot of price action to compare either. Node monkeys. Anything Bitcoin got smoked, I bet. Bitcoin NFTs just haven't really done anything this cycle, surprisingly. There was an initial run to begin, but for the most part, they haven't really been able to do much. Meebits, they're less than $1,000. That's crazy. See, you guys can buy a Meebit for less than $1,000. These things were worth 5, almost 6 ETH in the last cycle. 11K. That's pretty crazy. 13 grand, 15 grand. That's wild. See, so some of these are in the complete gutter. And if we're going to end up seeing a run in Ethereum, then this is really where we're going to see money end up running to. These are basically the original NFTs. Neo Tokyo, how much are these? These are only worth 5 grand. This is what I paid for mine in the bottom of the last, or in our bear market. In fact, it might even be lower. The amount, let's see. When did I buy mine? It doesn't show the whole price history, but Neo Tokyo would be a perfect one that I'd want to get into. $5,500 isn't very much versus what, in my eyes, we're going to end up seeing from them big picture. Let's see. Metis, let's go take a peek. It's been a little while. Let's share this tab. So with Metis, I thought for sure we were going to hold this support right in here. And Metis is another example of kind of what Ethereum did in the last cycle, where it had that 14K run, comes down, looks like it's breaking out. And it does break out, but then it just kind of makes that false little bull trap and then sells it back down for one more low. This is kind of the same thing as that move. You know, it's following Ethereum, obviously. So we ended up seeing that next lower low. Let's see if I can pull up an indicator. Let's see what the RSI looks like. So the RSI, technically we have bullish divergence. So we do have bullish divergence that's formed on the RSI. We also have bullish divergence in here on the shorter time frames right here. So in my eyes, this thing's going to at least bounce back up to like 35, 36 bucks. Could even go a little bit higher, retest that high, and then start the move. Big picture, we need to get above $70. Once we get above $70, in my eyes, that's really where this thing's going to pick up in a big way. But Metis looks really good. It's one of the better buys in my eyes. It's my biggest investment. That's the one I focused on the most. And, you know, ETH investments have been pretty much destroyed up to this point. But, you know, for the most part, Metis is kind of at the same price as I've been buying it the whole cycle. It's not really wrecked. I've just been accumulating at this exact same. I made my first original buys with Metis throughout this entire period. Got some low ones back down in here. Bought a little bit throughout this period here. And now that it's all the way back down to this same support, everybody has another opportunity to accumulating these range lows. And in my eyes, it's going to end up bottoming, and we're going to see this thing take off in a big way. This is my favorite layer 2 to hold this cycle. And I really lean towards this thing taking off. And I really think it's basically the best layer 2. You could say Arbitrum and stuff, but I don't like Arbitrum. The token doesn't do as much as what we see with Metis. Sol BTC is following ETH BTC. Yeah, you're right. ETH ETH kind of was the paver for the altcoins, and Solana was the second biggest one in command, and it really does just sync up to the price action of ETH. It followed ETH cycle and even the first Bitcoin cycle almost identically. There was almost no difference. Seiacoin. I have not looked at this in a long time. Do they have the... Yes, they do have the whole price index. What the heck happened to my chart? I don't know how to remove that. TradingView updated and I don't like it. So when you look at Seiacoin, such a glorious 2017 cycle. This is all I want in the world, is another one of these. That's it. Lord, please. It was so legendary. You guys have no idea. If you weren't there for 2017, man, it was the most magical thing. I was also like 18 years old, so back then you feel like a kid still. But man, if we get another one of those, I'm going to feel like I'm a little 5-year-old kid all over again, because I'm telling you, they are so fun. But when I look at this, it looks like the 2017 cycle. Like all of those altcoins had that 2013 run. Remember, because 2013 was very similar to 2017. 2013 cycle had this massive parabolic trend in Bitcoin. Bitcoin went on this huge move, and that was actually the beginning of the original altcoins. So Bitcoin peaked in 2013, and all of those original altcoins, like the XRPs and the ones that were from around in those prior, Dogecoin and stuff, they had that first huge run. And when they ran super hard, that was where we started to see kind of charts that looked like this, just massive parabolic moves and these huge corrections, right? And then what we ended up seeing was, those altcoins that had that big sort of correction, they would make these kind of lower highs like this, and then they'd go all the way back down and just go sideways, and they just kind of look dead. And then the 2017 cycle happened, and then they just went super parabolic like this, and then did another one of these all over again. So that's always kind of why I've said that I really thought that we would see another 2017 type of cycle. And I still think it's possible, considering when we're looking at Seiacoin, this is still a higher high, and it's still an impulse, and it's a pretty big impulse at that. Wave 1, wave 3, wave 4, and then this big extended wave 5. A, B, C, back down. And then even throughout this consolidation here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A, B, C. We're still holding a higher high here. So even though we fully retrace the move, for example, if we look at this impulse from the last cycle, that's where we held support. So this was all of the higher high that we had. And now if we're looking at this most recent impulse, this is all of the higher high that we have. It's just barely a higher high. So assuming that the broader market is bottomed, and this is going to do the same thing, this thing will probably come back up, do something like that before our cycle top. But if we have that fire, or the money printer fire up, it's honestly just going to probably go like this, and then just go into a parabolic trend like that. If it's going to. I mean, in my eyes, it will, because this setup is the same setup as XRP before its 2017 cycle. If you zoom all the way back and look at XRP, it did the same freaking pattern. I'm not even kidding. And this is what I'm talking about. Do you guys see what I'm talking about here? Comment down below if you know what I'm talking about. And let me know if you disagree, if you think I'm stupid, or whether you think that this is what's playing out. Because this is why I've always said this is the 2017 cycle. And I've maintained that belief. Our last cycle was the precursor to this. Right? Remember, this was 2013. 2013, 20 has this first little lower high. This would have been 2017. And then it has this little lower high. And then everything just kind of goes sideways, not doing anything till all of a sudden, bam, we have another one of those all over again. And I'm not saying that Seiacoin is going to go quite that parabolic, but wouldn't it be amazing if it did somehow? If there really was just that much money ready to go into crypto that it had another 2017 run. I don't know, but up to this point, it's like 5% of the population owns crypto. So if we were to see like a 30% own crypto, I mean, it really could do something like that. I'm not going to say it won't, but yeah. Seiacoin. I'm all in on XRP, piled millions into it from 2020 to 2023 in the depths of the bear. We'll sell at my targets, but most of it I'm holding indefinitely, earning yield in DeFi. Yeah, I mean, there you go, man. There's your plan. Stick with it. Take a lot of profit, though, on the cycle top. That's for sure. Buy into the dips. XRP is here to stay in my eyes. I don't think that that's a bad idea. What up, Taylor? Accumulation season, baby. Agreed. Can you do an analysis on EGLD? Yeah, I'll go take a gander. Oh, shiz, not that. What was it? EGLD. Is this one it? Multiverse X? I mean, I'm on a 5-day time frame, and there's a significant amount of bullish divergence on it. Yeah. Since here, there's been bullish divergence. So I'm on a 5-day time frame. If I went to a weekly, I'm sure it'd be the same. Yeah. So you got bullish divergence on the weekly, probably most time frames, I would imagine. Yeah, there's plenty of bullish divergence on all of the time frames. When you go to like a, I don't know, 3-day or whatever, it has a perfect Elliott wave impulse. 1, 2, 3, 4. Wave 5 blow off top. And then this big correction. So in my eyes, it does look good for reversal. It does kind of look like you'd see one of these happen all over again. I don't know how high. I don't know anything about this project. All I'm saying is it has perfect Elliott wave structure. We finished that ABC. And even though it did make a lower low, there's a significant amount of bullish divergence on virtually every higher time frame. So I do think that it is primed for a reversal. What are your predictions for XRP after all the bullish news and the fact that there are rumors it may replace Swift? I mean, I don't know about the rumors, but I think XRP is going to do phenomenal. I think that XRP is going to hit 28 to 30 bucks, and on the high end could hit 50 bucks. That seems a little bit, $50 seems a little bit more unrealistic, but you know, it's still possible nonetheless. My target's been $28 since the last cycle. I'm still sticking to that same target. That's where I felt was kind of like a good price for it. But you know, it has a bear market, and then we could go for another cycle. I don't know what happens in the further cycles. That's the issue. All I know is when the institutions show up, I'm going to pull it up. Hold on a second. Okay. I'm going to copy this and paste it over here. So right here. This is the valuation of a market cycle. And this is what I pay attention to when I'm looking at Bitcoin on the long-term basis, because I've been in Bitcoin since early 2016, right? I bought Bitcoin at $400 or $450, and I've been in it ever since. So in my eyes, that was here. Like, and honestly, no. I would say 2016 was like starting to get into this period over here. The stealth phase and stuff, that would be way early into Bitcoin. You know, the people that were super early mining it, all of that stuff, because there's a big portion of Bitcoin that existed prior to me being in it, like 5 years of it. So I would say that was over in here. And then as you're starting to leave the stealth phase and getting into the awareness phase, this was probably, it's kind of hard to say exactly, because when we're looking at the institutions, the institutions really weren't here until now, right? So when we're talking about where we're at, was this cycle, our last bear market, the first sell-off in the bear trap before this happens? Or is this the first sell-off that we're at kind of right now inside of Bitcoin? I don't know. But all I know is when you're looking at it, smart money is anybody that's in there prior to the institution. So, I mean, really, smart money was probably over the last 10 years. So now, over the last 3, we have real institutions involved for the first time ever. So in my eyes, is that here? I don't know. I don't know where we're at. I think that we could be at the ending of the institutional phase where we're kind of over in here. That last cycle would have been, the peak, the first sell-off, the bear trap, and now we're kind of in this period before the media attention, enthusiasm, public greed, delusion takes place. Obviously, every cycle does this in and of itself. But when I'm talking about the broader market of Bitcoin, the broader cycle at play, we haven't had institutions until now. So I don't know where the everything cycle is going to be. All I know is the institutions are always in before the public drives up the value. So in my eyes, it makes sense that our last bear market was this first sell-off and the bear trap, and the institutions bought that dip, and now we're sitting right over in here, just about to get all of that media attention and then go into the true cycle's top. So that's why for me, I'm selling everything when it comes to crypto. I am not holding anything. And the only thing that I will participate in the bear market is yield with like stables. I am not touching any altcoins. I'm not touching anything like that. I will buy Bitcoin in the dip, and that is it. I don't even have a lot of faith in buying altcoins in the dip. There will be something I'll throw some money at for fun. I bought Solana in the bottom of the last cycle at $10. So I knew that was going to follow the Ethereum cycle, and it perfectly did that. So there is certain things I'll put money into altcoin wise. But Bitcoin always leads the cycles. Bitcoin's always that driver. So for me personally, I'm much more focused on selling everything at the top of this cycle because I do believe that the bear market that follows is going to just be too gnarly to, hold through. I just think it's going to really destroy a lot of people. And it's going to be the one that you want to make sure you'd have the most profit taken beforehand. Because I remember what 2017 was like. And I do actually think that the same thing is going to happen in this bear market, assuming that we see a 2017-like cycle. Because if we don't, then yeah, can you imagine what happens to altcoins if we ended up peaking early, like right here, and then starting a new bear market, or just kind of going sideways throughout the rest of this year? Most of them would be dead anyway. So, I think at the end of this cycle, if we see a big blow off top, altcoins will get smashed again in the same ways they always do. The opportunity in the cycle comes in. Well, now we can actually earn yield on a number of these different DeFi protocols. And so, sell your cryptos that are worth however many X's here, and then take the stables and just earn yield off of them. Like, it's, in my eyes, that should be the go-to. I don't want to hold any crypto in a bear market because up to this point, it's sucked every single time. So I just don't know why you would. But if XRP replaces SWIFT, the only way that level of volume liquidity is realistic, XRP would have to be a minimum $100. I mean, it's possible, but how do you even know that that's going to be a real thing and going to happen? What if SWIFT just replaces itself with a version of SWIFT that's comparable to XRP, right? Like, there is going to be, like, yeah, XRP will be used and it is a global thing, but it doesn't have to replace SWIFT. Like, SWIFT in and of itself could just replace itself with a better version. So, like, I think a lot of that will happen with a lot of, DeFi stuff. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe XRP does replace SWIFT. And in that regard, I don't think that it's unrealistic that XRP could hit those valuations. But, it has to happen. Like, it would have to be that level of adoption, which is possible. It's just, I'm still selling at the end of this cycle. I don't think that happens in the bear market. I guess it's possible, but yeah. Can you do analysis also with dog? Bitcoin? What is that? I don't even know where. Post the contract address. Oh, I don't know if you can. But I don't know where to find it. Elon posted Maxim USA. Oh, is that why it's pumping? Keck looks good. Keckius Maximus. Wait, is that what this is? No, it's not. This one. This is the best looking meme coin besides Fart Coin. Keckius Maximus looks fire. It's just got this perfect rounded bottom. I don't know why. I really don't know why. But it's only got 24 million market cap, 25 mil. In my eyes, this thing could pump really hard. If it goes to the prior all-time highs, it's 16x. So honestly, Keckius Maximus looks fire. Chain link. All right, this is my last one I'm doing. I got chickens to feed. Oops. Oh, Linky, Stinky. Stinkiest Linky token. I mean, to me, it just looks like a 5-wave rise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A, B, C. And we're going to be starting wave 3 next. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Something like that. It'd have to happen really quick because we're looking at a peak at the end of this year. But yeah, still the same thing. It seems impossible. Oh, I didn't even. Yeah, I shared my screen. We're good. Alrighty. That was all I had for you guys. I hope you found some value in this. Hold it out. Buy the dip. I think we're going to bottom, but we'll see from here. We still have a lot of stuff to happen with, the Fed. That's the big thing I'm watching for. But I appreciate you guys' support. And with that being said, I will catch you guys in the next one. As always, peace out, even though you can't see me.